The grave was nearly done when Elias Boone looked up, breath steaming in the cold, and saw the wagon cresting the hill. It was an old freight rig, its wheels cracking the frostbitten earth, pulled by a single sway-backed horse that looked as miserable as he felt. The driver was hunched forward, collar pulled high, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat dusted in snow. The wind keened low across the barren stretch of prairie, whistling through dry mesquite and shaking the frost from the bone-white fence posts that marked the graveyard's edge. Elias straightened, shovel in hand, shoulder burning. They always sent him when they didn't want questions. The wagon creaked to a stop a few feet from the open grave. The driver climbed down and walked stiffly around the back, throwing open the canvas. There she was, wrapped in a white burial cloth, laced at the throat. Pale hands, small and still, crossed neatly over the chest. No shoes. Her hair, thick and dark, spilled out like ink on linen. Elias stepped closer, shovel planted in the ground. This her? The man nodded. Name's not important. His voice was dry, clipped. She passed in the night. Family don't want fuss. You're to bury her before sunup. Elias looked at the body again, then back at the man. Where's the death notice? The man's eyes narrowed beneath the brim. You think I'd be out here in this hellfrost wind with a breathing girl? Elias didn't answer. He just extended his hand. The man reached into his coat, pulled out a pouch of coins, and dropped it into Elias's palm. Heavy. Too heavy for a pauper's grave. She got kin? Elias asked. No, just land she don't need no more. That sat ugly in the cold air. Elias nodded, slow. I'll take care of it. The man tipped his hat, but didn't offer a name. Didn't wait around, either. He climbed back onto the wagon seat and turned the horse. Elias watched him vanish into the blur of snow and distance, like a man wiping his conscience clean with every hoofbeat. Elias crouched by the stretcher, bracing his hands on either side of her. The cloth was damp from snowmelt, thin enough that he could see the faint rise of her ribs, the outline of her chin. Her lips were bluish, her lashes stuck together with frost. Still, there was something off. Something wrong. He leaned closer. Then it happened. A flicker. He froze. A second passed, and her eyelids, barely, fluttered. The shovel hit the ground with a thud. She was breathing. Shallow, like a newborn deer, but unmistakable. Her lips trembled. Her lashes twitched. Elias staggered back, heart hammering. A dead girl didn't breathe. She's not dead. He dropped to his knees beside her, tugged the burial cloth down. Her neck bore bruises, faint but fresh. There was a crust of blood behind her ear. Poison? Choking? Something deliberate. Not the natural peace of someone taken by sickness. Elias looked toward the trail where the wagon had gone. No sign. Just wind. Just snow. He ran a hand down his face, cursing low. He had a choice now. One that could hang him. Walk away. Fill the grave. Take the coin. Or protect something he didn't understand. Something fragile and broken and breathing. He stared at her again. Her mouth barely moved, as if forming a soundless word. Then her hand twitched. A single shiver, like a leaf on cold water. Hell! He gathered her into his arms. She was cold, lighter than he expected, as if someone had drained the life from her by slow degrees. He carried her away from the grave, boots crunching hard against frozen dirt, past the rows of unmarked crosses. His cabin stood just beyond the hill, tucked between two frost-stiff cottonwoods, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. Inside, the fire had burned low. He kicked the door open with his heel and laid her down on the cot beside the hearth. The warmth licked at her skin. Her breath came faster now, ragged, shallow, but steady. He wrapped her in blankets, set a kettle over the fire, then pulled up a chair and stared at her like she was something he wasn't sure was real. Silas found them that way. The boy crept in from the back door, snow-dusted and wide-eyed. You bring a ghost home? Elias didn't smile. Close enough. She dead? No. That a problem? Elias looked at the girl. It might be. Silas stepped closer. Who is she? Don't know yet. The boy's gaze lingered on the bruises. He said nothing more, just fetched another blanket from the trunk and draped it over her shoulders. Elias watched him, heart twisting. 10 years old, and already he knew more about decency than most grown men. The kettle hissed. Elias poured warm water into a tin cup and held it to the woman's lips. She didn't drink, but her mouth parted. He tried again. This time a little spilled down her chin, but some slid past her lips. Her throat moved. "She's trying," Silas whispered. "That counts." Elias nodded. The girl stirred again near dusk. Her hand clutched at the blanket, eyes flaring open for a second. Pale gray. Startled. She looked straight at Elias, then past him. Then she curled in on herself and fainted again. That night, Elias sat by the fire, polishing his old revolver. The girl slept fitfully, murmuring words he couldn't make out. Names? Please? He didn't know. He just watched. In town, they would say Elias Boone had no use for women since the earth took his wife and the child that never cried. They would say he talked to fence posts more than people, and that the only thing he buried better than grief was bodies. And yet here he was, feeding soup to a woman who was supposed to be dead. In the morning, she woke with a start, trying to sit up. Elias caught her shoulders. "Easy." She shook her head, eyes wild. "You're safe," he said. "No one's going to bury you. Not while I've got breath." Her lips trembled. Then she did something unexpected. She took his hand. She didn't speak. Not a word. But her grip was strong, almost defiant. He felt the raw tremor of fear in her touch, but also something else. Resolve. Elias stood. "You got a name?" She hesitated, then reached for the ash pile by the hearth. With one finger, she drew slowly. "Anna." Elias stared. "Anna?" She nodded. Then she reached out and wiped the letters away, like a child erasing a mistake. She didn't want to be found. He looked toward the window, where the wind rattled the shutters. The man who'd brought her would come back, one way or another. Or someone worse. He'd buried strangers for years. But this woman? She wasn't going in the ground. Not yet. Elias Boone might have been many things, a broken man, a quiet one, a drunk some nights. But there was something he knew better than most. When the dead come back to life, someone always wants them dead again. And that was where trouble usually started, and where redemption, if you were lucky, sometimes clawed its way in, shivering, wrapped in silence, asking for nothing but a second chance. Elias watched her curl deeper into the blanket, her hair spilling like coal over linen. Then he picked up the shovel leaning by the door. Not to bury, but to dig, because no one gets to steal life twice. Not on his land, not under his roof. And maybe, just maybe, if she was worth saving, so was he. For 3 days, she didn't say a word. Elias watched over her like a sentry, silent, grim, tired down to the bone. But every hour she stayed alive, he grew more certain he'd stepped into something far meaner than a girl buried too soon. She slept with one arm curled to her chest like she was guarding something precious. Even in unconsciousness, her breath came shallow, her face half flinched as if expecting another blow. Silas was the only one she didn't tense around. He'd sit at the edge of the bed and peel apples with a hunting knife, talking about dumb things, his favorite rifle, how the schoolmarm spit when she yelled whether a bear could outrun a horse. Sometimes her lips curled, almost smiling. But not quite. When she was strong enough to sit up, she pointed at the chalk Elias kept for fencing marks. He gave it to her without a word. She scrawled one name on the wall beside the hearth in a shaky hand, Annabeth, then underlined it. Twice. Elias stared at it a long time. She erased it 5 minutes later. It snowed hard that night. The storm came down like a punishment, blowing drifts across the ranch until the outbuildings disappeared under white. Elias worked with numb fingers to keep the livestock from freezing, pushing through wind and ice to secure the doors and keep the firewood dry. When he stumbled back inside, boots soaked and spine screaming, she was sitting by the fire, bundled in every quilt they had, a cup of warm broth in her hands. Silas had braided her hair. "You're letting her stay," the boy said. Elias didn't answer. He just pulled off his coat and crouched by the fire, his jaw set. Annabeth raised her cup slightly in thanks. He nodded once. That night, she dreamt of something awful. She woke Elias with a cry like a choked sob, hands gripping the blanket so hard her knuckles bled. He steadied her with one palm on her shoulder. She didn't speak, just shook her head over and over like she was trying to forget something nailed to her mind. By morning, Elias had gone into town. He hadn't meant to. He never went without need. But this time he had questions that burned through sleep and stilled his hands at the table. He left Silas with instructions and rode into Thistle Bend under a gray, untrusting sky. The town was its usual small, grimy self, weather-beaten storefronts, half-curious glances from old men nursing coffee on the saloon porch. But there was something taut in the air today. Too quiet. The sheriff's horse was tied out front. Not common on a Monday. Inside the general store, Elias bought sugar, soap, and a new pair of boots. Then, careful as you like, he asked the clerk if anyone died lately. Quiet like, woman of about 25. No family. The clerk leaned back, scratching his head. You mean the Crow girl? Elias paused. Crow? Yeah, Annabeth, I think. Married up to one of them Briggs boys. Folks said she got sick sudden. Died in her sleep. And they buried her? The man snorted, said they did. But no preacher gave rights. No town notice. Just poof. One day she was here, next she was a ghost. Elias kept his face blank. Where's the Briggs Ranch? You sure you want to go poking that nest? Just point me. The clerk hesitated. West of Dry Creek. They own most of the low ridge now. Harlan Briggs runs it since his brother passed in that fire. Fire? Big one. Month ago. Took down the old homestead. His brother, Simon, I think died in it. Word was he left things in a bad way. Some say he owed money. Others say Harlan was always the one with brains. Elias left without another word. Back at the ranch, Annabeth was outside, wrapped in his old wool coat, staring at the snow like it owed her something. Her lips were pale, her posture wary. She didn't startle when he approached. You married a Briggs, he asked softly. She didn't move, just nodded once. Simon. Another nod. Slower this time. You loved him. No answer. She took the chalk again and wrote on the porch wall, I was sold. Elias stepped back like he'd been slapped. Then she added a second line beneath it. Harlan wanted the land. Simon was dying. I was just the deed. Her hand trembled. She looked away. Elias read the words twice, then turned and stared at the horizon. He said nothing, but inside, something began to burn. That night, Annabeth found his ledger. She didn't snoop, he left it open on the table. Just names and payments. Names of the dead, what he was paid, where they were laid. She touched one page gently. A woman, buried last spring. Consumption, Elias said. Her husband cried after I laid her down. Then married the saloon girl 3 weeks later. Annabeth pointed to another name. Shot. Elias nodded. Card game. She kept turning pages until she found her own name. Elias Boone, burial, outskirts, paid in advance, no kin. She stared at it for a long time. Then, quietly, she crossed her name out with one line. He watched her. You don't have to be her anymore, he said. She looked up. You can be whoever comes after. For a moment, it seemed like she might speak. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then nodded. She tapped her chest once lightly. Me. That night, the dog didn't bark, but Elias heard the crunch of snow. He slid his rifle from behind the stove and stepped onto the porch. 2 men on horseback stood at the edge of the trees, not moving, faces hidden. One had a lantern. The light swayed slowly side to side, like a warning. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched. Elias raised the rifle slowly. You're one fence too far, he called out. The lantern lowered. Then both men turned and vanished into the dark, like wolves unwilling to bite just yet. When he came back inside, Annabeth was already by the door. She'd seen it, felt it. He handed her the rifle. She didn't flinch. The next morning, Elias found her drawing in the frost on the window. A symbol. Simple but oddly familiar. A curve, a slash, a crooked V. What is that? She hesitated. Then she whispered her first word since waking. Brand. Elias froze. He knew that mark. It had once been burned onto the flank of a long-dead steer out on a neighboring ranch. A ranch that had mysteriously burned. Same week Simon died. Same week Annabeth was declared dead. He poured himself a drink. It tasted like rust and memory. Silas came in, dusting snow off his boots. Uncle? Elias turned. There's a man in town asking about a girl. Says she's a cousin. But folks say she ain't got no cousins. Annabeth tensed. Elias nodded slowly. We need to move her. Where? Nowhere far. Just out of sight. The barn was cold, but the loft was dry. Elias layered it with fresh hay and old quilts. She didn't protest when he carried her there, just gripped his coat with one hand like she was afraid to let go. He left Silas with her and returned to town, this time wearing his old coat with the inside pocket stitched to carry iron. He walked into the saloon and found Sheriff Daggert sipping whiskey by the window. Something you want to tell me? Elias asked. The sheriff raised one bushy brow. Plenty. None I feel like sharing. A girl was buried last week. Don't know what you mean. She didn't stay buried. Daggert sat back slow. Some folks just don't know when to lie still. Elias didn't smile. You try and make her lie still again, I'll dig a hole wide enough for all of you. The room went still. The piano player stopped playing. Daggert didn't blink, but his jaw tensed. Elias turned and walked out, every step loud on the wooden floor. Back at the ranch, Annabeth was waiting by the stove, hair damp from melted snow, face pale but calm. You stirred the nest, she said, voice hoarse. You're alive, Elias replied. That stirred it just fine. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped forward and touched his chest. Why help me? Elias thought about it, then answered with the truth. Because when I saw you in that grave, you weren't the only one buried. She lowered her gaze, but her shoulders eased. And for the first time, Elias saw not just a girl who wouldn't die, but a woman fighting to live. The wind turned sharp in the days that followed, like it had teeth now. Elias felt it in his bones. Something was coming. Annabeth moved through the house like a shadow made of breath and hesitation. She'd begun whispering more, though she spoke only when she had to. Her voice was husky, uncertain but alive. She no longer flinched at the door, though her eyes still checked every window before she crossed a room. Her presence had settled into the space like snow on a rooftop, quiet, soft, but with a weight that couldn't be ignored. Silas built her a shelf beside the hearth and filled it with things he thought she might need: dried flowers, a stub of a mirror, a button hook. When she thanked him, the boy blushed and muttered that she was better company than Elias on any day, which made her laugh in that cracked, almost soundless way. But none of them truly relaxed. Not with the memory of those men in the trees, not with the eyes they knew were still watching. Elias kept a loaded rifle by every door and started sleeping in his boots. His hand drifted to the butt of his revolver too often. A life digging graves made a man twitchy, but protecting someone who'd already been left for dead once? That turned nerves into fuse lines. One evening, while splitting kindling, he spotted something strange carved into the edge of a barn beam. A brand. Same one Annabeth had drawn in the frost. He hadn't carved it, and Silas didn't know it was there. Someone had marked the place. Annabeth confirmed it when he showed her. She stared at it for long while her hand curled in her sleeve, then whispered, "It means they've claimed it." Elias swallowed hard. "Claimed what?" "Everything inside," she said. "They think you're still here." "I am still here." He looked at her. "You ready to fight for it?" She didn't speak, but she nodded. The next night, Elias dreamed of fire. He woke to it. Smoke curled under the bedroom door, thick and low. He leapt up, boots hitting floorboards with a jolt. Silas was already stumbling into the hallway, coughing, eyes wild. Elias kicked open the front door as a wave of heat hit him. The barn. Flames roared up the east wall, licking toward the hayloft. Annabeth. He ran. No hesitation. No coat. Just instinct. The wind drove the fire westward toward the corral. He pounded into the barn, ducking under the smoke, shouting her name. Annabeth. She appeared through the smoke, limping from the loft ladder, her coat held tight around her. Her eyes locked with his. For a moment, nothing else existed but the living flame and the breath between them. Then she stumbled. Elias caught her, wrapped his arm around her waist, and half-dragged her into the snow. Silas threw a pail of water toward the edge of the porch, but it hissed useless against the blaze. They watched the barn collapse in on itself, the roof buckling in a spray of sparks. The fire swallowed it all. Tools, hay, the wagon, the last of the feed. Everything. Annabeth leaned against Elias, shivering. They're warning us. He looked down at her soot-streaked face. Then we'd better answer. The sheriff arrived in the morning, smug and slow as honey in cold tea. Tragic accident, he said, tapping the ashes with his boot. Old barns go up quick. Elias didn't bother responding. Sheriff Daggert squinted toward the porch, where Annabeth stood beside Silas, a scarf pulled high around her jaw. That your niece? No kin, Elias said flatly. She's a guest. The sheriff grunted. Looks awful familiar. Elias met his gaze. You'd know, wouldn't you? The sheriff smiled, but it never reached his eyes. You planning on rebuilding? With what prayers? Well, let me know if you need help digging another grave. The smile vanished from Elias's face. Just one. The sheriff turned without answering. After he rode off, Elias found Annabeth in the ruins of the barn, turning over a charred piece of wood. Her expression was hollow, like something in her had burned too. That's twice now, she said. He said nothing. I'm not meant to live. That's a lie someone fed you. I saw the man who poisoned me, she whispered. It wasn't Simon. Elias crouched beside her. Who? She hesitated. Harlan. The name dropped between them like a gunshot. He said I was the key, she whispered. Said he'd make it clean, no blood, no bruises, just sleep. And then he'd take the land. My land, she said bitterly. Only thing my mother left me. Elias's jaw tightened. He doesn't get to win. Annabeth turned to him. Then, you'll help me stop him? He looked into her eyes. They weren't soft anymore. They were steady, cold, and clearer than any winter sky. I'll help you bury him, if it comes to that. Her lip trembled. I don't want more graves. Then you'd better learn how to stand tall. Because the next time they come, it won't be fire. It'll be bullets. Annabeth nodded, slowly, then straightened. That night, she moved into the main house. Not as a secret, not as a shadow. She took the far room, once Elias's late wife's sewing space. Cleaned it herself, stoked the fire, unpacked the quilts. When Silas offered her the tin star he'd made from scrap metal, she pinned it to the curtain as a kind of joke. But it felt like something more, a line in the dirt. The next few days passed in wary silence. No riders, no threats. But the tension had shape now, something thick waiting. Elias took to sleeping by the door, shotgun resting across his lap. He and Annabeth talked in fragments. What crops could still be saved? Whether the well could hold another winter? How many nails were left in the shed? But the quiet between those words grew, less sharp. She asked about his wife once. Just once. He didn't tell her much, just that she was buried under a tree he never visited, and that grief had made him cruel to himself for a while. Annabeth didn't ask more. But later that night, he found her by the tree, kneeling in the snow, her breath curling into the dark. She wasn't praying. She was listening. The next morning, Silas spotted a stranger by the creek. Elias rode down fast, rifle across his back. The man was gone, but tracks led toward town, deeper than one set of hooves. More were coming. That evening, Annabeth opened the small wooden box she'd kept hidden in the corner of her room. Inside was a folded paper, burnt at the edges, and a rusted wedding ring. She handed the paper to Elias. It was a land claim, still valid, still in her name. It's not just worth money, she said. There's water underneath it. Springs. Enough to feed cattle, even in drought. Elias whistled low. That's why Harlan wants it, she continued. He'd kill anyone who stood in the way. Then let's not stand. Let's move. She blinked. What? Tomorrow, he said. We go to the notary. Get this filed. Public. If he tries anything after that, it's not just between us. It's law. You trust the law? I trust people hearing about it, Elias said. Truth spreads faster than bullets, sometimes. She held the paper to her chest. Then I'll go. Good. He hesitated, then added, You'll ride beside me. Her face softened. Always. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch, snow crunching underfoot, watching the dark. Annabeth joined him, wrapped in a shawl, her breath white. He glanced at her. You sure you're not scared? I'm terrified. He nodded. Me too. But I'm not running. She touched his hand, gently, without demand. Neither pulled away, and somewhere in the cold between them, fire sparked again, but this time it stayed in the walls. The morning they rode into town, the sun was still low, barely more than a smear of light against the frozen ridges. Elias led the way, rifle strapped tight to the saddle, every sense alert. Annabeth rode behind him, draped in a thick cloak and wool gloves, her jaw set with quiet resolve. She didn't look left or right. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, as if she knew every step into Thistle Bend was a step deeper into danger, but she wasn't turning back. Silas had begged to come, but Elias left him behind with a warning and a promise. If we're not back by nightfall, ride to Fort Wilder, and don't look back. Annabeth hadn't spoken since they left the ranch, but Elias could feel her tension in the rhythm of her horse's breath, in the way her fingers twitched around the reins. When they crested the final hill and saw the town in full, a thin spine of buildings leaning together against the wind, he reached back and touched her arm once. Just enough to say, I'm here. The notary's office sat next to the telegraph post, its window fogged from the inside. Elias dismounted first, holding Annabeth's stirrup as she slid down. She moved with purpose now, not as the girl he pulled from a grave, but as a woman ready to claim what no man had a right to steal. Inside, the clerk squinted at the paper she handed him. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. This here's a valid deed, he muttered, filed under Crow. Annabeth. That's her, Elias said. She was declared dead. The clerk protested, looking up. She's not, Elias replied, voice flat. You'll file this again. Today. The clerk swallowed. Sir, there'll be questions. I'll answer 'em, Annabeth said. Her voice cut through the room like a knife across cotton. And if anyone asks why a dead woman walked into your office and reclaimed her birthright, you tell them she never stopped breathing. Only the world stopped listening. The man nodded and began stamping the papers. They walked out with the official seal tucked in Elias's coat. The deed now bore the date, time, and witness signature. Legal, permanent, but outside, trouble had already arrived. Sheriff Daggert leaned against the hitching post, chewing on a toothpick, boots muddy and spurs untied. Well, I'll be, he said, straightening. You look real lively for a corpse, Miss Crow. Annabeth didn't flinch. You've been protecting a liar. Daggert smirked. Liars got more money than truth does in these parts. Elias stepped between them. You going to try and stop her? The sheriff shrugged. Ain't my place. You burned my barn, Elias said quietly. Daggert's jaw worked. Hard thing, fire. Got a mind of its own. I've got one, too, Elias replied. And it's getting tired of letting snakes rattle. The sheriff didn't smile this time. He tipped his hat, then turned and walked off. But the set of his shoulders spoke clear. He was rattled. They didn't linger in town. Too many eyes, too many whispers. But just before they left, Annabeth stepped into the post office and handed the clerk a copy of the deed. Mail this to Judge Clements in Fort Wilder, she said, with a letter stating my land has been falsely claimed and nearly cost me my life. The clerk blinked. And who shall I say sent it? She held his gaze. Annabeth Crow, alive and unwilling to be buried. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky was bruising toward dusk. Silas ran out to meet them, eyes wide, arms windmilling in excitement. You did it. Elias nodded. She's on the record. Then they'll come tonight, Silas said, matter of fact. Neither Elias nor Annabeth argued. They made ready. Every door was barred, the rifles loaded. Buckets of water hauled near the porch. The fire kept high. After supper, Silas curled in the corner with a shotgun bigger than his arms and a determination that would have made Elias proud if it hadn't scared him so damn much. Annabeth paced. Her hands couldn't stay still. She tied and retied her shawl, checked the windows, kept her hair tucked under a hat like that might protect her from recognition. Elias finally said, "You're allowed to be afraid." "I'm not afraid," she said. "I'm waiting." "For what?" She turned. "To see if the man who tried to kill me is brave enough to finish it with my eyes open." Elias didn't answer. He just handed her a pistol. She took it with steady hands. They waited. The wind died down around midnight. Everything was too still. Snow stopped falling, and the trees stood like frozen men watching. Then the dogs began barking. 3 horses approached from the south trail. Elias saw the silhouettes before he saw the faces. 2 riders he didn't know. One he did. Harlan Briggs. He rode like he owned the ground beneath him, his coat clean, his gloves stitched with gold thread. He didn't dismount, just stared at the house with a faint, mocking smile. "Evening," he called. "Heard tell there was a miracle out this way." Elias stepped onto the porch. "Miracle's got a bullet now. If you're aiming to undo it, you'll want to think again." Harlan laughed. "Oh, Elias, you were always good with shovels. Should have stuck to digging. You really think one little girl's gonna stop me?" "She's not little," Elias said, "and she's not alone." Annabeth stepped out beside him. Harlan's face changed. Just a flicker, but it was enough. He hadn't believed it until that moment, until she stood on her own feet, not in lace or a coffin, but in wool and defiance. "Annabeth," he said, "you're confused. What happened to you? It was illness. Poison in the well. We tried to save you." "You tried to silence me," she said, "and now I've spoken." Harlan's jaw ticked. "You're making a mistake. I was the mistake you didn't bury deep enough." He reached for his belt. Elias raised his rifle. "Go ahead," he said. "Start the war." The other men hesitated. One looked to Harlan, but Harlan didn't draw. He lowered his hand and sneered. "This isn't over." Elias stepped forward. "No, but it's legal now." And loud. Annabeth took the deed from her coat and held it up. "You want this land," she said. "Then come to court. Not my grave." Harlan spat into the snow. "You think law matters out here?" Elias chambered around. "Matters enough when someone's willing to die by it." There was silence. Then Harlan wheeled his horse and rode off, his men behind him. They disappeared into the trees. The ranch stayed quiet the rest of the night. But the fight wasn't over. At dawn, Annabeth stood at the porch, hands tucked in her coat, watching the pink light rise over the hills. Elias joined her, rubbing warmth into his hands. "We'll need allies," he said. "I mailed the deed to the judge," she replied. "Let's see if decency answers the letter." He looked at her, brow furrowed. "What?" She smiled faintly. "I never used to believe in mornings. Always thought they were just the start of more bad news. And now, I think they might be a beginning." He didn't say anything, just stood beside her while the sky grew lighter and the land, hers now, lay silent and waiting. The first shot came just after dawn. It cracked through the brittle stillness like God had split the sky. Elias had already been awake, sharpening his knife at the edge of the porch when the bullet slammed into the corner post 6 inches from his face. Splinters flew past his cheek. He didn't flinch, just rolled sideways, rifle in hand before the second shot echoed across the hollow. Silas yelled from aloft, already reaching for the scattergun. Inside the house, Annabeth's boots hit the floorboards like thunder. They were here. Elias had known Harlan wouldn't take the loss quiet. A man like that didn't bleed without demanding someone else's blood to balance the scales. But he hadn't expected the siege to come at sunrise, bold and fast, with 4 men and horses galloping through his fence line like they owned it. He took aim and fired. One rider dropped before he hit the ground. Annabeth burst from the doorway, pistol drawn, eyes narrowed. She wasn't running this time. She wasn't hiding. She stepped into the light with her hair braided back tight, coat flapping behind her like a battle flag. 2 more shots rang out from the trees. Barn. Elias barked. "They're circling." Silas darted behind the woodpile, drawing fire as Elias dropped to one knee and clipped the shoulder of the second rider. The man screamed, tumbled from his horse, and crawled toward a low ridge. Annabeth moved like she'd trained for it. She crouched behind the water barrel and fired 3 times in clean succession. One missed, but 2 didn't. By the time the smoke began to settle, only Harlan remained, still mounted, face dark with rage. He raised his rifle with slow precision. Elias stepped forward, unarmed now, rifle spent, hands low. "No more," he called out. "You come any closer, and I'll put you in the same grave you tried to bury her in." Harlan didn't lower the weapon. "Your deed means nothing," he said. "Your paper won't feed cattle. It won't stop men like me." "No," Annabeth said, stepping beside Elias. "But truth might." She reached into her coat, pulled out a folded letter, and raised it high. "The judge in Fort Wilder received this yesterday. He's sending marshals. The law's coming. You can ride out now, or you can be tried for attempted murder." Twice, Harlan's face twisted. "You think they'll believe a woman who was declared dead?" "I think they'll believe the man who dug the grave and found her breathing," Elias growled. "And the bullet holes in my porch will speak louder than you ever could." For a moment, it seemed Harlan might shoot anyway, might take what little pride he had left and spill it in the snow along with more blood. Then Silas stepped out with the shotgun, barrels raised, too steady for a 10-year-old boy. "Go home," the boy said, "before you lose what's left of your face." Elias almost smiled. Harlan looked around. 3 of his men were down. One was moaning, dragging a trail of blood toward the trees. The sun crept higher behind him, revealing every jagged edge of his silhouette, casting his shadow long and crooked across the earth. He said nothing more, just spat into the dirt, turned his horse, and rode out slow, like a man who couldn't decide if he'd lost or just run out of cruelty. When the dust settled, the land fell silent again. But this time it was peace, not pause. Elias dropped to the porch steps, blood seeping through his sleeve where a grazing shot had found its mark. Annabeth knelt beside him, her hands firm, her breath visible in the cold air. "Hold still. You always boss folks around after they save your life?" "You didn't save it," she muttered. "We survived together." He met her eyes. "Same thing, isn't it?" She blinked slowly. "It's not nothing." Silas joined them, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with leftover adrenaline. He looked from Elias to Annabeth and back again. "Is it over?" Elias exhaled. "I think we just buried it." Later, after the wounded were tended, after the bodies were covered and the fire was built high, Elias found himself standing near the graveyard again. The same plot, the same shovel. Only now, the earth was undisturbed. He held the handle, fingers tracing the worn wood, and thought about that morning not so long ago when he'd stood right here, ready to bury a stranger for coin. Thought about how his hands had trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. A kind of quiet death he'd let creep inside him since the day his wife stopped breathing. He never meant to become the kind of man who walked alone, who turned grief into duty and buried hearts as often as he buried bodies. But Annabeth changed that, and not with a word, with a breath. The first shovelful had been for her. But maybe he realized now it had always been for him. A grave he'd been digging for years, one choice at a time. Annabeth joined him, her steps soft in the snow. "You came back here. Some places pull you. You thought I was dead. I did. And now." He turned, eyes finding hers in the soft light. "Now, I think I've been breathing wrong for a long time." She reached out, took his hand, laced their fingers together. "You know the hardest part about dying?" she said. He shook his head. "It's realizing how easy it is to vanish. But coming back, waking up when the world's already moved on, that's something else." Elias looked toward the sky, the gray clouds thinning just enough to show a slip of blue. "You're not the only one who came back." She leaned into him, head resting against his shoulder. And for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. The ranch wasn't just a stretch of cold earth. It was home. Not perfect, not safe yet, but theirs. Days later, the marshals arrived. Papers were filed, testimonies taken. Harlan's arrest came without ceremony. The town whispered, of course, but no one stood in their way. Annabeth reclaimed her land legally. The springs beneath it still flowed. She offered Elias a share. He refused. I don't want your land, he said. I want your days. She blinked. You don't even know what kind of woman I am. I know you breathe. That's a start. He kissed her then. Not fiercely, not like the stories tell. Just quiet, grateful, alive. And if you ask Elias Boone what happened that winter, he won't tell you about the barn fire or the shots or the blood in the snow. He'll tell you this. I was hired to bury her. Took the shovel. Stood over her like death's accountant, ready to settle the books. But she opened her eyes before the first clump of dirt hit her chest. And I swear to you, friend, something opened to me too. The girl who wouldn't die reminded me how to live. And the first shovelful, well, that one was for me.